In this video I'll run through how to program and cut a part that's larger than the cutting envelope of your machine. So in this drawing here I've got this red rectangle that represents the cutting area of the machine, which we've got here 78 inches by 138 inches. And then the magenta square here would represent the sheet of material that we're cutting our part out of. And we're looking to cut this ring here, which extends beyond the cutting envelope of the machine. And then what I've also done here is I've drawn in a line a couple inches inside of the cutting envelope that we're going to use in conjunction with these two holes that I've drawn here at the end of the line to position the sheet. After we've moved it, we're going to pick up on these holes so we can know the orientation of the sheet, and then we'll rotate our program based on that angle that we pick up here. So I made this line a number that will hopefully be fairly easy to remember, 86 inches, and then at the end of the line I've drawn a couple holes here. So I made these holes basically size of the nozzle OD, so they're about 3/10 of an inch diameter. So there's one there, and then there's one at the other end of the line. So now we've got that, we're going to go ahead and open this up in WARDCAM. Let me just make sure I've saved that. So we'll go ahead and open that file. And we're going to delete this rectangle, we don't need that. And on the rectangle for our sheet, I'm just going to go ahead and select that and explode it, and then delete one of the lines, since we don't want that to be a closed contour, because when we add our toolpath then it'll get the lead-ins on the wrong side. And then what we're going to also do now is just draw rectangles or squares around these circles here, so it does put the lead-in on the proper side of those, because if I put the lead-in on this circle now, it's going to have it on the outside, and I want the lead-in on the inside of that. So I'm just going to use my rectangle command and left click and left click. Doesn't really matter the size that you make it. And then come over here, left click and left click. Okay, so now we'll go to our next step. So we'll cut this out of aluminum, and I'll just say it's going to be 1/8 inch. Now I've made a new machine and added indexing to the end of it. So if I go into my database and machine database, I just took my standard 1440 machine, clicked on add machine, which made a copy of that, and then I renamed it, adding index on the end of it. And the reason I did that was I wanted to be able to use one of the 5-axis tools of bevel cutting to be able to add a partial toolpath later in the process here. So I've activated the 5-axis button on this machine. And then if you haven't made a new machine before, the other thing you want to make sure you're doing here after you create the machine is copy materials from one of your existing machines. So since this is a 1440 machine, you would want to find your 1440 machine in this list and click on copy materials, and that'll copy the existing materials that you've got in this database over to your new machine. So in this step, after we select our machine and material, over here on the right you can either choose marking or open contour cutting, and we're going to add a toolpath to this line here that indicates to us where our separation point is on the two different areas of the part that we're going to cut. So we're going to go down, I'm going to choose the marking tool, and I'm going to zoom in on the line here and click on the end of the line and add a toolpath to that line. I'll delete that later, but in the next step in the process I'm going to need that as my visual reference to work off of. So then we can hit our next button, and then in this step here I'm going to add my toolpath to the ID and OD, which these ones we're going to end up deleting later. But in order to add a bevel cut, you can't add a bevel cut to something that doesn't have a toolpath. So first we have to add toolpaths to the ID and the OD, and then we can add the partial bevel cuts, which will just be vertical cut. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit my auto button, and it puts the leads on everything, including on these little squares here that I drew, which I don't want to cut those, so I can just in my list here find those and delete those. So that's that one. I'm gonna delete that, and can also delete this one over here, which is going to be, looks like this one. And then after I've added the bevel cuts, then I'll delete the ID and the OD on the ring. So now we can come over, activate the bevel tool, and bevel angle, we'll set that to 0, and then the height number doesn't really matter. It's typically going to default to half of whatever your material thickness is. You don't have to change that. And then down here, by default, this is always off, which is good because we only want to do a portion of the contour as a bevel cut. If this is turned on, it'll apply the bevel cut to the entire thing, which we don't want. So make sure that that's off. And we'll go ahead and add bevel cut. So if I zoom in here, so for our first cut, we're going to start slightly above this line here. So I zoom in and I can just click up here a little bit. So this will be a start point for the first cut, and then zoom out and then zoom over here, and somewhere over here just click. And now when I hover my mouse, I want to hover my mouse so that this portion of the line is highlighted, so I can left click and lock that in there. And then I can do the same thing on the outside. So since I started the first cut over here and came this way and ended over here, then I might as well start this next cut over here so we don't have to wrap it too far. So I'll click here again slightly above the line, and then come over here slightly above the line, and then again hover the mouse so it does the lower portion of the arc, and then we'll come back later for the second program and do the upper portion. Alright, so now we can delete these things that we don't need. So we don't need the marking contour anymore. We'll delete that. And this is one of our holes, so we'll leave that, but we're probably going to end up changing the, let's see, which one is this one? Inside lead, so that's our ID on the ring there. Let me collapse this Bevels tool so it's a little bit easier to see what we're working with here. So that's the inside lead on the ring there, so we'll delete that. And this is the outside ring on the lead, we'll delete that. And then these other ones are on the little locating holes that we'll leave those. So it's going to do this. It'll do the inside cut, outside cut, and then do that, so that's fine. So we'll go ahead and hit our next button, and then I'm going to move my 0 point to the corner of my sheet, and then create my CNC file. And I'll call this indexing 1, so I'm going to overwrite that one. Alright, so now out of the machine here we've got our first program. So first program would be basically just like normal. You go ahead, you load that, move your cutting head to the corner of the sheet, and we'll start that program. Let me jog around here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just start this, simulate this. So it goes up, cuts our first locating hole, rapids over, and cuts the second locating hole. Actually, sorry, does that portion of the ring. And then the other portion of the ring, and then we'll cut that last locating hole. just stop this and jump ahead. So finish off that cut and then go over and cut the second locating hole. Alright. So once that is done, then you'll go ahead and move the sheet, and then we're going to pick up off of those two reference holes to verify the orientation of the sheet after you move it, since once you move it, it's probably not going to be exactly the same orientation as it was when you did your first part there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and make a plate, and I'm going to tell the orientation of that plate based off the location of those two holes on the plate, and then we'll go ahead and use that number, whatever angle it comes up with, and rotate our part program in WARDCAM by that amount. So I'll go into the plates area, and I'm going to create a plate, and my plate width is going to be this number here that we used for our line. So click on create plates, and material, I'm just going to call it indexing, doesn't really matter. Thickness doesn't really matter. Width does matter, that's the key thing, 86, and then length can be whatever number. Save plate. And then we're going to go ahead and load that on table. And so what I would do at this point is jog. Basically we would be jogging our cutting head over the center of one of these holes here. So if you can imagine me jogging my cutting head around and positioning it right above the center of this lower right hand circle hole that we cut here. So then I jog my cutting head down slowly and get it centered right on the hole. So if that's where the center of that hole was, I can then click on cutting head above corner, and then I do the same thing. I want to jog over to the hole that's at the lower left hand corner of the sheet, so I want to click on change second corner and choose that, and I jog over. And then once I get close there, I'd bump in very small increments and get myself nice and centered over that hole. So I'm going to just jog up here a little bit, make this a little bit exaggerated as far as what the angle is, just so we can see it. Zoom out here a little bit more. Alright, so let's exaggerate that a bit. So I'm just going to zoom in here. So I would be just bumping my cutting head at the machine and moving in very small increments, slow speeds, and get it nice and centered over that hole there. And see here. Alright, so let's say that that's where the center of that hole is. Then we would click on plate in position, and so now the controller knows the orientation of that sheet, knows where that corner is. I'm also going to save this XY position because that's currently where our start point is going to be, over that lower left hand corner. So I can go into my move panel, and so we're going to come in here, click on save, give it a name, click on enter. So we've got our XY, and you'd have Z numbers in here more than likely. XY position for the center of that hole, which is going to be our start point, And then I always like to also just relative that point out, so I've got that as a visual reference also, that we're at the correct starting point. So now if I go into Setup Program, it doesn't matter which program is highlighted, we're not actually going to cut it, but if you click on Setup Program, we've got the image of the sheet and the angle that it's at. I can click on Align with Plate, it'll rotate whatever program, and it'll show me what angle that my sheet's rotated at, and I'm just going to jot that number down, and we're going to use that in WARDCAM. So 2.65 degrees, so I can just click on Change Part, and we're going to go back to WARDCAM, and we're going to go back to our geometry step in the process, which I'm already at here, and we're going to rotate this entire thing by that amount. So my select tool is active, so I can select everything and use my rotate command here, and I'm going to rotate this around the center of the circle or the end point of this line, since that's going to be our 0 point for our program. And once I've selected that, prompts down here at the bottom for rotation angle, so we're going to go negative 2.65 degrees. So you can see that now that our drawing here is skewed by that amount, and then we go to our next step in the process and we use our marking tool again and add our marking onto that line there as our reference, and then we hit our next button, and I'll click on my auto button, and I'm going to go ahead and delete cuts that I don't need right now. So I don't need that cuts or that cut, and we're going to leave that cut and leave that one and delete that and delete that, and then we'll activate our Bevels tool, and this time we're going to start slightly below that marking line there. So I'm going to left click somewhere down here and left click somewhere over here, and then left click up here to lock that in, and then start over here, left click here, left click over here somewhere, and then left click up here to lock that in. And now we can delete all the other tool paths, so we don't need the marking contour anymore, we don't need that, and we don't need that, and we're just left with those partial cuts. And I hit my next button again, and now, very important, need to move our 0 point, because right now our 0 point is here off in space. We want it to be at the center of this hole over here, or the end point of this line. So if I zoom in over here, so that blue box is highlighting the end point of my line, my end of line snap is on, I can left click and move my 0 point to the end of that line, which is also the center of that circle, and then click on CNC, and we'll make our file. And we'll go back to our controller. So now we've got our new file. It's at that angle. Since I haven't moved my cutting head, I'm at what's going to be my start point. If I had moved my cutting head, then I'd want to move back to use my move panel and move back to my start point, but we're already there, so we don't have to do that. Click on Load Program, and there's the sheet, there's the part, and if we zoom in here, we've basically got our start point at the corner of that sheet, which should be the center of the hole, and then we've got the part that we're going to cut. So always a good idea, if you haven't done this before, practice it out of some plywood or some inexpensive material first couple times so you get the steps down. And if you have any questions on it, let us know. Thanks.